Every time we lose someone we love, we are left with a gigantic task. It's a task that has two parts to it. We have to celebrate their life because there is no way it could ever be replaced. There is no way to ever state just how precious and amazing and valuable that life was. We have to celebrate them and give thanks that they lived. But we also have to grieve. Because if we try to avoid the grief and the loss, if we try to bury it or stuff it or ignore it, the road ahead will be terrible. So we have to try to figure out how we can celebrate and grieve at the same time. It's an impossible task. And that's why we do it in church. Because God has a specialty, and it's impossible tasks. Nothing is impossible with God. So that is why we come here, because we cannot make sense of our losses. We cannot understand how the people that we're thinking of tonight could have been so excruciatingly lovable, even though we can acknowledge that they had flaws, like we all do. We can't reconcile how they could be that indispensable, how the hole that they've left in our lives could be this big. We can't make sense of it. But we also have to figure out, how can we move forward with some sort of path? How can we never stop honoring all that they are and mean to us while still having a future ourselves? How can they be dead and we still be alive? That is the work. That is the mystery. That is what we scratch our heads saying, how is it that my heart could be this broken but still be beating? How could I be this hurt and still be here? For so many people, that's a reality in their lives. One of the things we have to understand on a night like tonight is that grief and love are inseparable. The reason we're grieving is because we loved. Actually, grief is the price we pay for love. That's what grief is. It's the cost of love. It's the bill. It's like we have a receipt that we hold that says, look, I paid the price for this. I've got the receipt right here. I am carrying this receipt. I promise you this person mattered to me because I've got the receipt right here. So this is what is so hard for us. Grief and love are inseparable, and we are never going to stop loving this person. We'll never stop loving them. So what can we expect our healing to be like? If grief and love are inseparable, then what does it look like to be healing from our loss? I think that there's a couple things about healing that we should talk about tonight. And I think that we should acknowledge that there are people here that had a loss that dates back to almost a year ago. Or there might be people here that aren't here because of a recent loss, but they're here because they knew they needed to be here because of a loss that wasn't within this year, but is weighing on them right now. So one of the things we need to acknowledge is people are at different stages of the healing process tonight. Some people are starting to feel like they can go parts of a day without thinking the whole time about what they've lost. There are some people here that are experiencing some sort of excitement for the first time about something in their life.
There are some people here that may be feeling like there's a little bit of newness of life in them. And I will tell you that there are other people here right now whose loss is fresh. And some of them, the loss is fresh because it literally happened within this month. There's people here right now that had losses that happened a week and a half ago. That's happening here right now. There are other people for whom the loss is completely fresh, and it happened long ago. So we're all approaching healing a bit of a different way. But let's talk about what healing looks like when we're talking about grief. Healing is not something that any human being can do for someone else. None of us are healers who create the healing. Doctors know this. Doctors do not heal people. They have no power to heal. What doctors do is clean and purify the site. They then apply medicine, or if it's an injury that involves a break, they set it so that it is in the correct position, and then they give the person rest. And then that's all they can do. Doctors provide cleanliness, medicine, and rest, and God does the healing. That's true for all of us. We can't force ourselves to heal. We can't speed up a healing process. We can only submit to healing. And one of the things that we're going to have to do tonight when we think about healing is we need to be able to say, I may not be 100% healed, but that does not mean that I am not healing. I may not be 100% healed, but that doesn't mean I'm totally broken. I am healing. It is one layer at a time. It is still excruciating. And I have days where the scab gets completely ripped off and I'm back to zero all over again. But that does not mean I am not healing. That does not mean that I am not moving in a direction. And that direction is a great big zigzag for most of us. And if it is true that grief and love are inseparable, then perhaps we need to let go of the expectation that we will ever be 100% done with grieving. Maybe it's fair to say that. My grandmother, my Bachi, who people who come here hear me talk about a lot, died 15 years ago tomorrow. And she was my favorite person. And I think about her and talk to her and grieve her in small ways every day. I have tears for her still, 15 years later. And I learned that from her because her husband, my grandfather, died before I was born. But he was always part of our family. He was always someone she talked about. She told me the story of their love. She told me the story of them raising my mother and my uncle. She told me about all of the wonderful times, and she told me about what a knucklehead he could be. And then she told me about the night that they were dancing at a fireman's retirement party. And that he said, I think I need to slow down. And then he fell back and he was gone. She always carried the mantle of widow with her, but it did not limit her. I knew her as a joyful woman. I knew her as a joyful woman with losses. I knew her as someone who found lots of joy in life, but could still shed a tear on the right day for the fact that the love of her life was in heaven and she was still on earth 40 years later. What might healing look like when grief will always be part of the story? What does healing look like if it's unrealistic to expect that I would ever stop loving and grieving a person who's not here? One of the things we learn about people in grief is they don't want people to make them feel better. They just want people to listen and understand. They don't want their grief taken from them. Their grief is, for some of us, the exact connection that we have. So what would it look like to be in some sort of healing after how we're feeling tonight? What would it be like to feel like perhaps there's a little bit more lightness in our hearts and in our lives? I would like to propose to you that one of the things we need to do, especially on those days where the only thing we want to do is to wrap our arms around that person and feel them right here. And we are so sad and angry and bitter that we cannot do that. When that is our feeling, we are being challenged to seek connection with them in a subtler way. How can we find, through the spiritual work that we do, because all of us are spiritually attuned in some way or we wouldn't be here tonight, how can we get in touch with the subtlety of their presence in our lives and still wrap our arms around them, even though physically there is a disconnection? What would that look like? I want to give you one example of what that could look like. And it has to do with a workshop that I went to a couple of years ago, run by indigenous grandmothers. These were Native American women who were part of a number of tribes in North and South America. They came together for a conference for spiritual leaders. And so there were priests and ministers and social workers. There were people that were there from all different sorts of helping professions. And these women, these strong leaders of their Native American tribes, were teaching us about what they knew about life and death and joy and sorrow and grief. And they taught us something very beautiful and very subtle about how we can connect with those people who are no longer physically with us in this realm. And it's a beautiful practice. It is very subtle and it is very powerful. And I will just demonstrate it to you, but I would like to propose to you that you consider, who is it that you need to consider some sort of subtle ritual like this with? Maybe there's a loved one that you're here to honor tonight that you need to consider something like this with. And maybe it's someone who died a long time ago, but you need to be in contact with the beautiful subtlety of that connection. So what I would like to do is explain to you what these grandmothers taught us to do. They said, in the Native American tradition, we recognize that all four directions are very meaningful and have their separate gifts. So when they are honoring a deceased loved one, they honor them in each of the directions in which they are now embodied. And then they honor them in the different parts of creation where God allows them to reign. In the sky, in the earth, and inside of us. So I'm gonna present this practice to you in the way that the grandmothers taught it to me. And actually, the name of who you're praying to is for you to insert. But they taught it to me with the word grandmother. And on this eve of my grandmother's 15th anniversary of her homegoing, I'm going to say that in her honor. And I'm going to offer it to you as something to consider as a way to find a substantial, even though subtle, connection with those you love. And I'm going to start in the way that the grandmothers taught me to, facing the east. Grandmother, I see you sitting in the east. You are sacred, and you are looking at me. I pray to you, pray to you. You are sacred, and you are looking at me. Grandmother, I see you sitting in the south. You are sacred, and you are looking at me. I pray are sacred, and you are looking at me. Grandmother, I see you sitting in the west. You are sacred, and you are looking at me. I pray to you, pray to you. You are sacred, and you are looking at me. Grandmother, I see you sitting in the north. You are sacred, and you are looking at me. I pray to you, pray to you. You are sacred, and you are looking at me. Grandmother, I see you sitting in the sky. You are sacred, and you are looking at me. I pray to you, pray to you. You are sacred, and you are looking at me. Grandmother, I see you sitting in the earth. You are sacred, and you are looking at me. I pray to you, pray to you. You are sacred, and you are looking at me. Grandmother, I see you sitting in my heart. You are sacred, and you are looking at me. I pray to you, pray to you. I am sacred.